So we are talking HEARTBEEPS, a 1981 science fiction comedy that stars Andy Kaufman. Now, this has one notable celebrity attachment, and that is John Williams does the score. Yes, that's John Williams. But I doubt many people have actually heard of this movie. So HEARTBEEPS is a odd kind of romantic science fiction comedy, and it focuses on essentially two household robots. It's set at some point in the future, we assume. And in this future, pretty much everything is robotics. There's lots of almost like C-3PO type robots everywhere that are used for household household chores, essentially, stuff like that. And it's on this big factory, and we have Andy Kaufman's character and a kind of a female kind of humanoid robot, and they kind of end up sparking a bit of a romance and decide they're going to kind of take matters into their own hands and kind of go on a bit of an exploration out into the wilderness. And they are accompanied by a third robot who is this kind of like comedy stand-up robot who's kind of constantly smoking a cigar, and on the way on their adventures they actually make a fourth robot who is this kind of like R2-D2 type, who is meant to be like a child. So you almost have this family unit. You have a husband, a wife, a kind of like cranky old uncle, and a child almost. So this kind of like this foursome end up going into the world, having no real idea about what actually they're doing and kind of things that they're going to encounter, and they are pursued by a tank-like robot called the Crime Buster Deluxe, which is a cross between a tank and a Dalek. So Andy Kaufman's famous for not liking this movie. I got this on VHS years and years ago, and I actually quite enjoyed it for what it was when I was a bit younger. But watching again now, yeah, it's not the best, unfortunately. Unfortunately, this movie simply isn't very interesting. There's very little actual plot here. It's just a few robots going on a walkabout, really. That's basically the plot. But what does work, I do feel anything that has the Crime Buster in it is quite fun. He's a kind of a character in himself. It's kind of like robot tank thing that just sort of talks to himself and has got a bit of an attitude problem. He's actually quite fun. And you've got also kind of appearances from genre faves like Dick Miller, Randy Quaid in here. But overall, it's a weird story because we're meant to believe it's this kind of futuristic world, and there's all these robots and they have like packets of beer and stuff, but then the rest of it, like there's just regular old cars and stuff like that, and all the architecture just looks like 80s architecture and stuff like that. So it's this weird sort of like paradox of you have these kind of two worlds. They've really just like not bothered to make it look all that futuristic in certain aspects. But the main problem, I feel, is that our central two characters just aren't particularly interesting, unfortunately. It's quite sweet. It does have some quite sort of sweet moments here and there. But obviously the story focuses on these four robots, and none of them are all that interesting, unfortunately. There's a couple of like chuckles here and there, but it's meant to be a comedy. It's never really that funny. All the human characters kind of seem really just like caricatures. I mean, it's a very, very basic film, unfortunately. It still has a certain charm. It definitely has a bit of a certain charm to it. And like I said, I actually really liked this movie when I was younger, and I still kind of like it now, but it gets a little bit boring, to be quite honest, because it's just these guys walking around the forest, and it's kind of them talking about stuff in a like robots, but kind of mirroring what humans do, and the arguments and the kind of relationships that we all have as kind of human beings, essentially. So yeah, it's an interesting little time capsule, this one, and certainly not going to be for everyone. But if you are a kind of a retro film fan, you like this kind of like Barbarella, I mean, that's obviously years before this one, but that kind of thing, then you may want to check it out. I mean, the makeup effects, I think, are very good. The way they kind of do these robots looks quite fun, I've got to say, and I do quite like that, and you have all these kind of like ones in the background as well that all look pretty interesting. And it's interesting to the factory scenes, for example, and I actually kind of found quite interesting. But like I said, it's maybe worth watching just for the crime buster, because I actually kind of quite like that character himself, and he's got a great theme tune. And John Williams' score, it's not the best John Williams score, but it's still, you can still tell it's him. Overall, I've got to say, I'll give this movie a 5 out of 10. It's kind of average, but it's still worth watching if you are, you know, a big kind of old school science fiction fan. Anyway, 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me comments, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.